This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about the new all-time high we just hit, Bitcoin 125,000. This may be the worst new all-time high ever because it's definitely a bittersweet time. We actually went as high as 126,160 according to Clarke Moody's Bitcoin dashboard, currently trading just over 124,000. But it's definitely a bittersweet time because this Friday it looks like Bitcoin Core is going to ship version 30, which is malware for the network. It makes sense that Friday is also World Mental Health Day. I'm not sure this was planned, but it's definitely appropriate the way it turns out. If you want to understand the Knots versus Core debate much more closely, I'll put a link to this in the description notes in case you haven't been following it. But basically, it's a complete mess, and it's one of the worst messes we've ever seen in free and open source software, as Melvin Carvalho points out here. 2 decades in open source here. They, meaning Bitcoin Core devs, are out of their depth. I haven't seen process this bad. On controversial changes, you ship a safe subset and widen review. Version 30 of Bitcoin Core, skip that. Classic FOSS, free and open source software failure mode that competent maintainers should handle as a routine. Now, Bitcoin's fiat price has rallied sharply in the past during similar crises in the community, like the 2017 block size wars, for example, where 2017 we started the year at something around $1,000 per Bitcoin and ended the year with a blow off top closer to 20,000. So basically, Bitcoin was going through another very harsh existential crisis in 2017. The price was appreciating, so that is rhyming with what we're seeing here. This may just be a relic of the Bitcoin 4-year cycle, which may or may not break. I'll put a link to this in the description notes that talks about it. But basically, we have seen this pattern, at least historically, the last few cycles, where we have 3 up years followed by a down year, bear market. So 2019, 2020, and 2021 were all up years where the market closed higher than it had opened at the beginning of the year. Then we had a very brutal bear market down year in 2022, mostly due to Terra Luna imploding and FTX, etc. And now we've had 3 up years. So this may just be part of the cycle. And next year, if this pattern follows, we should have a fairly sharp down year. Of course, there's no reason that this pattern has to follow, especially if we're entering a more inflationary regime where we're getting more dollar debasement. But that's something to keep an eye on. It just may be the macro, and it may be that Bitcoin rallies through the crisis, or it may not. Now, hodling is really hard, obviously. Would you or I have sold during the opportune wars of 2014 or the block size wars of 2017? I wasn't a hodler during either of them, so I can't say. I'm not really sure. But today in 2025, I'm probably more angry than scared, though. I haven't sold. I'm not selling. I'm going to keep hodling my Bitcoin and fighting until either we win, I'm dead, or Bitcoin is dead. And this is because Bitcoin remains the only game in town if we're going to make our way out of this global sovereign debt crisis and surveillance panopticon. If Bitcoin fails, it's because too many Bitcoiners stood by silently and watched Bitcoin Core make the biggest unforced error in software development history, certainly in FOSS history. Bitcoin Core likes to say that they do lots of testing on their software to make sure it's safe. Too bad they don't do any common sense testing, though. Like, for example, asking what happened to BSV when it made the exact same change and blew open op return from 80 bytes to 100,000 bytes in 2019. BSV devs, with BSV as a failed fork of Bitcoin called Bitcoin Satoshi's Vision. It has nothing to do with Satoshi or his vision. But BSV devs back then sounded just like Bitcoin Core supporters today, which is pretty funny to see. This is from the BSV, the Bitcoin SV wiki, talking about the changes to op return, and they sound exactly like Bitcoin Core supporters today. So the question is, storing data in the blockchain acceptable? In other words, non-monetary data. In a word, yes. The Bitcoin ledger, and of course they're not referring to Bitcoin here, they're referring to BSV, but this is how Bitcoin Core devs talk today. The Bitcoin ledger and the blockchain that secures it operate on the free market premise of user pays. If a user wishes to use the ledger to store data of any type, the only requirement upon them is they must pay for the space needed to store it. Now, they woke up very quickly and got a strong dose of reality when immediately after they made this change, they ended up with CSAM in their blockchain, as this reports in February of 2019. So this happened very early on. I was trying to look at the chart to see if something bad happened in terms of the price action or the fiat price of BSV when this happened. We had basically it selling off in early 2019 against the dollar, but of course everything was selling off against the dollar. If we look at BSV in terms of BTC at the beginning of 2019, basically BSV is weakening against BTC, but again, that's what it's been doing for basically really its whole history, as we can see here. And this is why I call it a failed fork of Bitcoin, because it's completely collapsed. So I couldn't see really any signal in the noise there. Wanted to talk about one other thing before we end today. I've also become increasingly convinced that what we've been seeing over the past 2 years with the inscriptions exploit in 2023 and subsequent years, and now the op return wars and the spam wars in 2025, this may actually end up, in retrospect, we may all realize that this was a sophisticated state-level attack. Beautyon states it. How does he state it? Beautifully, of course. And he writes here, the idea that Bitcoin could be developed in the open without state supervision, and that the software was run entirely by volunteers who reached a consensus about what it should do, was a pipe dream. All it took is one person and a small cabal to push a few kill shot changes that had the potential to wreck everything. No one or very few saw this coming. Certainly Luke Dasher saw it coming, but no one else really, or very few other people. No one or very few saw this coming. This attack on Bitcoin is extremely sophisticated, cunning, subtle, sinister, clever, long time horizon based. A weapon, when fired, shoots his payload at the person who pulled the trigger. Users of the software itself would be weaponized to bring it down, not because they don't have the resources to run the bloated clients, but because all normal people despise pornographers. This attack is like Operation Bernard, where forgers were employed to create fake Bank of England banknotes to disrupt the British economy, corrupt the money system, cause widespread rejection of its notes, and thereby kill the economy. In PC cancel culture, world of 2025, it wouldn't take much for the public to turn on Bitcoin that they already see as weird, useless, incomprehensible, and not required, quote, because we already have dollars and credit cards, unquote. Add op return to this mix where Bitcoin is permanently contaminated and you have a money that no one will touch except weird people who are probably, quote unquote, probably perverts. I mean, just look at them. It's a pity, but it's not over yet. We still have a chance here. As Agrix Drove Flow writes, not sure Bitcoin is a good investment after seeing the protocol destroyed so easily. I don't think that's true. As I respond, what we're seeing is a mass exodus from the reference implementation, namely Bitcoin Core to Bitcoin Knots. That in itself is a sign that Bitcoiners are still willing to rat around bad actors. And now Bitcoin node software implementations are much more decentralized than they were even a few months ago. So I think this is hopeful. If you're not all running a Bitcoin Knots node, you really should be, both to protect your own Bitcoin and to protect the network. We can see it continues to skyrocket. We're still hovering at about 21.5%. If you want to learn how to run your own Bitcoin Knots node, there are paid ways of doing it. There are free ways of doing it. You could just download the software for free on your laptop, or you can build a mini server, mini PC, convert it into a personal server, or you can buy a Start9 server, or you can buy one from Parman, for example. I'm not paid or compensated in any way to promote these products. Most of them are free, but I'll put a link to these in the description notes below. I also wanted to alert you to a new channel that I think many of you have seen. This is called The Halving. I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel and like this video, but let me play the beginning of this, and then I'll put a link to this in the description notes below so you can check out the other videos. They're quite clever.
Okay, so here's a great idea. Take the world's most valuable asset, the thing people call digital gold, and turn it into a permanent junk drawer that nobody can ever clean out. Brilliant, right? Well, that's basically what some Bitcoin developers are trying to do with this proposed update to the Bitcoin network. Up until now, Bitcoin had a little field called
I'll let you watch the rest on your own. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.